All right, I want to demonstrate the strategy myself, and we'll do a brief introduction as a spiral review. Okay, so welcome to part 3 of our journey here relative to differentiated instruction. We began with what it is and what it isn't. We took a look then at providing multiple pathways to students, learning our learners. Who are they as people? Who are they as learners? How can we meet their needs and how can we grow them from there? And again, accommodations and modifications might be mandated by an IEP, but differentiation is just good teaching, regardless of IEP status. Number of things that can impact who our learners are, be they physical, cognitive, emotional, social, their morals and values. And as far as universal design for learning, genetic factors that impact the brain grows in response to learning experiences. And you think about it, it's like any other tool, use it or lose it. You know, a sharp knife becomes dull, we need to sharpen it again. And among students' varied needs, instruction can increase engagement. And again, I want to emphasize engagement versus activity. They're not synonyms. I think teachers do a great job at having students busy, but we want to look at the level of their engagement. Just double checking no one else needs in. Okay. So, case study. Something that you have been working on. The draft was due yesterday, and the final draft due next week. Here's what I'm looking at. Is we're going to break this down. I just took this page and then made it into a doc, and I think it makes the most sense in your final copy then, just to how does what you submitted match up not only to these 4 areas, but then the sub bullets within them. So let's take some time to review and answer any questions you might have about this. So let's talk about student selection. Meet with a case manager and IEP teacher. Has anyone had a problem with that, or does anyone need some help or have a question regarding meeting with a case manager? Do you know the function of a case manager? If you don't, please ask. So everyone has had an okay time picking out an IEP student with the case manager. All right. In sum, as far as case loads, you can't, if you're an IEP teacher, special education teacher, you cannot have an unlimited caseload. Normally, things like learning support, you can manage 35 IEPs. When it comes to students with intellectual disabilities, that drops down to 15. So, relative to who you're dealing with, your case manager should have some understanding of who that learner is and what they need. So one thing we're going to look at with that student selection and with the case manager is, have you identified their particular need as far as their special need? Again, and then that'll be impacted by the SDI, the specially designed instruction. Does your case manager have a particular style that they've recommended? So does anyone care to share their meeting or a summary of their meeting with the case manager and these prompts?
I met up with my my special education learning facilitator, and we just kind of went over all the kids that I have in class who are identified, and then beyond that, any other student that she could think of that would fit this criteria. And we just kind of narrowed it down for the best that I'm going to get the most knowledge and the most that I can put into this yamen. So that's all.
So relative to that conversation then, mm-hmm. Taking the document and looking at the SDI, was that part of the conversation?
Yeah, so every year I print out all my IEPs and then all my 504 plans, and we put them into a binder so I can just highlight and separate. And then every 9 weeks, if there's like a new update or someone has a meeting, then we print off another one. So we just open that binder up and look through that.
Okay. Any other experiences anyone wishes to share relative to the meeting with the case manager? Same, okay. All right, data collection. So in your case study, you're going to collect and summarize data about the student while maintaining confidentiality. Yeah, you call them Dick and Jane, whatever. I don't need to know their particular names. What's their background information? SDI summary. So again, the SDI is the specially designed instruction portion of the IEP. I always felt as a teacher, if there's anything I need to know in the IEP, it's there, even beyond their particular disability, because that SDI is going to meet the needs of the disability. Specific emotional, intellectual, or educational characteristics and challenges or needs. So again, when I go and I look at the case study, the first thing I'm going to look at relative to the assessment of the completeness of the case study is the meeting with the case manager, some discussion about who that learner is, some discussion about the style. Next section, it can just be labeled 1, 2, 3 with some narrative as is. Or you could have it in a more traditional essay format. Data collection. So what is your collection? What is your summary of the relevant data, be it the background information, particularly, again, the focus on the SDI and any specific challenges or characteristics. Okay, analysis. Step 3, explain how the student's needs align with the concept of special needs or diverse learning styles discussed in class. So we're going to take this student and now we are going to identify, we're going to take this student and now we're going to identify their need and then meet the instruction to the need. Has anyone gotten what you've all submitted a draft? We have someone explain their number 3, how they tied the students' concepts to a learning style and perhaps a strategy.
So I can talk about mine. My son, I'm driving and my son is in the car. So if you hear any background noise, that's why. So my student that I chose, I actually chose her because she does well in class. She's very intelligent, and without really knowing her, you wouldn't really know that she had any kind of learning disability. But she, so her thing is an emotional disability. So she is very easily caught up in drama in and out of the classroom. She has a boyfriend who's super controlling, like all things like that. So she's very easily distracted, and she's also very shy. So one of the things that I put was like the think, pair, share. So pairing her with someone else who is definitely not caught up in the drama and things like that, and is very focused. I've actually, without realizing it, done that, and it worked very well because they kind of held her accountable for her part and her sharing aspect, whereas like usually she would kind of take the back seat and let everybody else do the work. Um, and the other one that I chose was I'm not gonna be able to think of it. Um, Something about presenting and I'm not gonna be able to think of it. I know I did think, pair, share though, and
Okay.
like I said, I've done that before without even realizing that that was like a labeled strategy kind of deal thing.
So, and often you need to keep in mind that emotional support students are on grade level. So uh, often when we think disabilities, we're thinking somehow they're behind from the standpoint of the curriculum. But when it comes to an emotional support student, such is not the case, that their behaviors, if you will, can impact their academics, but it's not an ability level. What's also interesting, too, when it comes to management in your class, is their behavior a manifestation of their disability? So, if have any of you had a special education student in your class who was emotional support, who may have had a discipline referral, but perhaps the consequence was something other than what you sought relative to it being a manifestation of their disability? Has anybody, is that a new term to you, or have you heard the term manifestation determination before? Have not heard it. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about manifestation determination. Typically, as an administrator, if you get a discipline referral, one of the things you have to process when you're doing that discipline referral is special education. Are they a special ed student or are they a regular ed student? Let me explain how that gets impacted. So the rules are for everybody, and everybody can receive consequences, and everybody should be held accountable. However, alternatives to suspension are not alternatives to accountability. You can still find alternatives to suspension, and you can hold students accountable. Obviously, suspension is a big consequence, but this may also play true in smaller consequences. So, if let's say a student is emotional support, okay, I was going to say emotional disturbed. That used to be learning disturb and emotional disturb. Now it's uh, learning support and emotional support. The titles will change during your career. The kids will not. So a student, I'm going to take Emily's student, in her class gets involved in the drama and has a verbal outburst, perhaps even profanity, to the point where that student needs to be removed from the room. Okay. When we process that incident, we must, as an administrator, we must process whether the student knew right from wrong in that incident and with that response, or is that a manifestation of their disability? Let me escalate that. If you have a student who is chronically suspended, multiple suspensions, could be multiple 1 days, 3 days, what have you, as a practice, Now, this isn't the law, but this is a practice based on the law, and I'll explain. As a practice, when we get students who have 7 cumulative days of suspension, they go on the radar of the special education case manager and possibly the school psychologist. Because if they get to 10, there is going to be a manifestation determination process. I'm going to go back to Emily's student. So Emily's student had this outburst, was disciplined for the outburst, came back to class. Now, drama escalates again, and perhaps there's a physical altercation. The student is out of school suspended a second time. Perhaps with these cumulative suspensions, now they reach 10 days. Now the school psychologist, and you can do a manifestation determination in under half an hour, between 15 minutes and half an hour, not you, but a school psychologist, is going to process that incident with Emily's student. Did she know right from wrong? Did she know it was wrong to punch another student? And here's the thing. If the school psychologist determined that the outburst or even perhaps the physical altercation was a manifestation of the disability, then you cannot issue school consequences. In something like a fight, we always issue not only school consequences, but referral to the SRO for possible citation, and that can result in a disorderly conduct, which are two separate pots that we're not going to get into at this particular moment in time. So, one thing unique to Pennsylvania is special education students learning support, special education or emotional support students cannot be suspended cumulatively more than 15 days in one school year. Students with intellectual disabilities can be suspended this many days, none. So if you have an ID student in class, they can never be suspended. That's the law. In Pennsylvania, if you suspend any special education student beyond 10 days cumulative, that's a little tally in the Bureau of Special Education. And if you have too many suspensions, particularly too many suspensions of special education students for too many days, you can end up in some type of corrective action with the Bureau of Special Education. So something to keep in mind relative to when we are managing behaviors. We need to understand, are those behaviors a manifestation of the disability, particularly when it comes to emotional support? So Emily explained the needs of the learner, and she picked 2 strategies. Now, like I said, I saw everybody had that done. So anybody have any questions before we move on? Go ahead, Chad.
So one thing that I kind of tend to notice, especially with the student that I picked, is that they typically seem to use the IEP as a crutch. And they just are typically a much lazier learner. And it's not even so much, this particular student has ADHD, so I do frequent check-ins, check for understanding. But essentially, he just kind of, if he isn't feeling it that day, he just comes up with excuses. Every time I come around, he's doing something else. Um, I'm just curious as a group if anyone has a good strategy on those type of students. But it definitely seems par for the course. Like majority of my IEP students essentially are all quote unquote lazier and use that as a crutch to get through the day.
So let's talk about the weaponization of an IEP, if you will. I was in a meeting with a parent this year, and we were discussing her son's lack of progress, and he was a special education student. And she said to me, she goes, "Mr. Rich, do you think he's bipolar?" And I said, "Ma'am, I think he's bi-lazy." And that can happen. And let me say the following: I don't think underachievement is solely in the land of the IEP. I think we can find in the land of adolescence students who are pushing themselves, students who are not pushing themselves. Let's go to your predicament. Okay, so I'm going to start regular ed scenario, then I'm going to go into your special ed scenario. So in the regular ed scenario, we have a kid. Sometimes he pays attention, sometimes not. He comes more days than he misses. He's not an axe murderer, but he or she is not doing everything that they're supposed to do in the time they're supposed to do it, and not doing everything to the best of their abilities. Maybe you have a few. Okay. Well, there's going to be a real life consequence. In my opinion, if you would come to me with that, I would say, well, what are their grades like? And one thing that has to match is if they aren't doing their work, then the grade ought not to be satisfactory. Okay. Now, I want to go to how does that vary on your attention deficit student. Understand that special education students can have a failing grade. However, here's what you need to do. One, as a teacher, do you have documented adaptations and accommodations? Now, in our grading system, there's a teacher journal that teachers obviously can go in and I can make notes about Chad, I can make notes about William, I can make notes about whomever I want, good, bad, or indifferent. So I can document not only Chad's inattentiveness, I can document that I addressed it, and I can also document that I gave Chad several chances to get the work done. Okay. So you need to have documentation of your accommodations and differentiation. Two, you need to keep, and I'm going to say you, and I'll get to the reason why. You need to keep the case manager informed on some type of regular basis. Now, at our school, we put out an IEP progress report internally weekly because we can pull the grades. If students are failing, the IEP case manager knows they can make contact with the teacher can make contact with them. The second is if you have an IEP student who is not doing what they're supposed to do, it doesn't have to be failing. I would notify the case manager if their work is inconsistent, if they're missing some assignments, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So one is the adaptations and accommodations. Two is contact the case manager. Three, contact the home. The first and best contact is the telephone. If you can arrange a phone call after work, but perhaps you don't have a good number, perhaps you can't come up with a common time, then you can send an email. But the three stages would be adaptations and accommodations, 1, 2, a conversation with the case manager, 3, notification to the home. And Chad, you can't do this on day 44 when grades are due on day 45. Now let me go to the difference between example 1, which was the regular ed student, and example 2, the IEP student. And here can be the frustration, particularly with people coming in from industry into the world of education, is when they have an IEP, the 3 things I said are your burden. You may not think it's right. You may think it's wrong. You can think it's right. that opinion is really irrelevant. It's the law. They have this IEP. Now, here's the compromise that some people make, and I don't think it's the best way to go, is I'm just going to give Chad enough to get him through. I don't want to put up with all that. I don't want to hear from the case manager. I don't want to hear from the parents. I'm going to get him through. You can do that, but you're really not doing that student any favors. So, Chad, I don't think you're alone when you come across some IEP students who weaponize that IEP, but I would encourage you to hold that student accountable, and unfortunately, the onus is going to be on you. I don't know if you like that answer, but that's my answer.
No, that's fine. Like I said, I was just kind of curious, if anyone else was running into that, if they had any other strategies that helped. But I guess ultimately, before I make sure I go down to any of that road, I need to have my ducks in a row,
Yes.
100% before I go down that road. So,
Yes.
Thank you.
Emily.
Yeah, so similar to him, I have a student that she has an IEP, and one of the things that she gets in her IEP is that if she fails a test, she can retake it for half credit, or for like the average of whatever her scores are. And she uses that all the time. Very frustrating. So the other day, I'm a nurse, so documentation is like my forte. And the other day, I gave them some time to be studying for a test, and she was sleeping. And also, like, when she wasn't sleeping, she was talking or texting. I said, this is your time to be studying. And so I documented that, like, she was on her phone, she was sleeping, I woke her up, I told her she needed to be studying like twice, redirected, whatever. And then in my documentation, I included, because we have like OneNote, and our principal and our special education teachers, they're all able to see it. Our guidance counselor, everybody's able to see it. So, I put in there, she'll be able to go down and take her test with our special education teacher, but she's not going to have the opportunity to retake the test if she fails it because she didn't utilize her study time. Is that wrong, or am I like I covered my bases kind of deal thing?
So you're on the right track. Let me suggest something as well. I would have in your scenario, I would have a conversation with the case manager about the following. I'm going to assume that you do not believe this is a reasonable accommodation. Remember, it's a reasonable accommodation. It's not an unlimited accommodation. What necessitates, not only does she get to do a retake, but she gets to do a retake up to her average or whatever the language might be. Here's my thing. You have documentation saying that this is an ineffective modification. She's taking advantage of this modification. I would do, and then the second part of that is, after you talk to the case manager, you can reconvene the IEP team to address that modification, and you can ask for a change in that accommodation. Let me give you an example. Okay, we're going to give you the test once, and you're going to be allowed a retake, but I'm going to provide you with an alternative assessment. I'm not going to give you the same test twice. So, i.e., I can take a test, fail the test, see the test, know it's on the test, go back to the test. If we really want to know about the learning, and here's where I think that where you're rock solid, if it's about the learning, then I feel obligated as the teacher on the retest to give them an alternative assessment. It can still be proportional to whatever grade, but I think the thing about it is, again, similar to what Chad said, you have a student who's now weaponizing this accommodation rather than utilizing it. So if I were you in that particular scenario, I would talk to the case manager about the appropriateness of the modification, Is it possible to reconvene the IEP team? And I always think, if you have a problem, let's bring a solution. If she does poorly, let's say below a C level, on an assessment, she can make up the missing 30% for 15% credit and get it up to an 85 if she does well on the alternative assessment. So that's a little more work from you, but if you get this student out of the habit of seeing the test, blowing it off the first time, get what I can get, and then now that I know it's on the test, I can go do the test. If you can get them out of that cycle, that might be helpful. That would be my suggestion to you.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Any other question, comment, or concern about dealing with a case manager? Okay, let me see where we're at here. Anything else on this case study before we move on? Any related questions? Okay. I enjoyed the conversation. Hope you are too. All right, so now let's look at Unit 3. And this actually gets us to where we are today, where we should be today. We're going to identify techniques for differentiating content, process, and product. So let's think about that. All of you have a program of study. All of you have a task grid. So that is going to be your content. Now, there's more than one way to address that content, which is going to be your process, and then your product is the end result, the assessment. Is it some type of physical product? Is it a paper pencil product? Does it have to be different than what other people are doing? Create flexible learning groups and individualized learning plans. Some of you have already talked about flexible grouping. Some of you have already talked about, either by design or sometimes the best things happen by accident, you've put these students in the groups, and that variable grouping has benefited all in the group. Don't be afraid of the individualized learning plan, because again, it doesn't mean 20 students, 20 plans. They are not all going to have 20 different needs. When we are creating these learning plans for students, there are going to be times where perhaps we group similar learning styles and learning plans, and there are some times where those need to be complementary. And I've heard examples in our discussion from both about putting same type of kids together as well as complementary type of kids together. Sometimes too, students might self-select, but sometimes too, your purposeful selection is good. Sometimes your random selection is good. Sometimes it forces us to communicate and work with those who we might not have worked with. Big idea. So what is going to be the overarching thought as we progress through this? Teachers can develop effective, personalized learning by tailoring instruction to groups of students with similar needs through varied approaches to content, process, and product. Essential questions. So when we address these essential questions, that should lead us to an understanding or greater depth of knowledge relative to the big idea. Why do we need to know our learners' readiness levels, interest inventories, and learning profiles? And we've talked about these three terms. Does an individual learning plan mean that every student is doing something different, learning something different, and being taught in a different manner, or does flexible grouping allow for similar learners to benefit? So again, reinforcing things that we've addressed earlier, but perhaps deepening our understanding of effective differentiated instruction. So we're beholden to state content. Let's address process. How have you gotten different students to accomplish the same part of the program of study, or have you had to alter or adapt the program of study? Say that again. Okay. So, as we look at content, process, and product, we have our program of study. Do you have an example of where you put different processes in that students could address the same or similar content?
So, one of the things that I normally do um, is I try to pick whatever our topic is. I'll put our weekly topic at the beginning of the week, and then I try to go throughout the week and just emphasize that topic in different ways. So, there's normally one day a week we'll have a 15 to 20-minute lecture for the students that learn best by just hearing me talk about it. I'll typically do a large group demonstration of the task. I put their homework towards an Ed puzzle style for students that would rather watch it on their phone and kind of with societal changes, they learn best from a screen. And then for the ones that I've marked as that need the one-on-one, I make sure when we're working on those tasks in the shop to get to them to have that one-on-one time so they can get that more personalized instruction. So that's typically how I differentiate throughout the week.
Roger, you had something to contribute?
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing. I try to attack the same topic different ways. Sometimes it's just talking. Day one might be talking, kind of same thing. I try to spend 15 minutes a day just going over topics. So day one might just be verbal. Day two, I'll have a slideshow up. Day three might be something within their Google Classroom so that they have references to look at. And I always make sure that students, since they're all in different learning levels and do things at their own pace, I'm big on communication. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but like I'm all about having the work done. So I have deadlines. But if you communicate with me and you need more time because something's taking longer, we can certainly help and have that one-on-one and chat with the student. Or the student could come to me and just say, yeah, it's been a rough week. I need a little bit more time to do this work. And they will, more than not, they'll get that time because everybody has things going on in life. And I want to see them do that work. So it's kind of a motivation at that point.
So I'm being told There we go. So I'm being told my microphone's not working, so I had to switch to my phone here so I can speak. Sorry for the echo. I guess that was everybody's wake-up call. Okay, so product. So you talked about different ways that you're addressing them. What about product? Is the outcome different? Here I think is the tough part. Let's talk about changing a tire. Let's talk about brakes. Let's talk about an oil change. In those scenarios, I would think that the product has to be more similar than different. Amanda.
So I just had a question. So, and maybe I'm just not understanding this correctly, but I was told that with that task list, that like POS program of study and stuff, I wasn't allowed to change any of the tasks or like accommodate them for any students. Everyone had to reach the same benchmark, but they could just meet it at different levels. Or am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong on that. And then let's take a look at regular ed versus special education. Okay. So I'm going to start on the reg ed side again. I don't know what your metrics are. We go through the program of study. I got to keep track of Amanda's progress. I'm going to score them 1 to 3. You may do the same tasks over multiple years and go from a 3 to a 4 to a 5. But if you get a 3 or better on a particular task, then you are competent in that task. Obviously, if we score you a 5, you're advanced. Now let's go to the IEP. So in order to be, and some schools vary as to how important this is, but in order to be a completer, we are attesting that they have some type of proficiency on each one of those tasks in the program of study. But the federal law is going to trump any state or local law. And the federal law would allow you to modify the program of study. Now, how that would be interpreted might vary, and let me explain. So, let's say there's a portion of the program of study that you have made a significant accommodation to a student, and with that accommodation, they addressed it, but maybe not to the level that everybody else addressed it. It was part of your content. They did their processes relative to their level. Are they a completer? Let me clarify. So, Amanda, if you have an IEP student and there is a particular portion of the program of study that they are struggling with, you accommodated them in your process, and they did produce a product related to that content, but maybe not at the level of mastery of others. In your certified professional opinion, is that student still a completer?
Then no.
And I think both A and B would have been correct.
Okay.
I'm not your content expertise. You are, right?
Right.
So what I would say is that they may or may not be a completer. And let me throw something else out there relative to regular ed and special ed. So accommodation, meeting students where they are. I'll come back to that, Colleen. So differentiation, meeting students where they are, regardless of where they're coming into, and growing them of learners, that's just good teaching. If they have an identified deficit, then we're beholden to IDEA, Individual with Disabilities in Education Act, first released in 1973, and that generates that IEP. You may have a colleague that believes they've generated a path forward for that student relative to that contact, and they are a completer. So I think if you're making those types of decisions, that should be an IEP team decision to help you out, Amanda, is I'm in the meeting with the case manager and the parent. You're discussing the program of study. You're discussing points on the program of study where perhaps they are struggling. You have tried different processes to get them where they need to be, and they have done something, maybe not to the mastery level of others. You could also discuss that in the IEP team as to, is that enough to be a completer? There's always a trump card with an IEP student, and that trump card is goals and objectives. Let me explain what goals and objectives are. Those are also part of the IEP. They're more important than grades. They're more important than credit. A student can graduate on an IEP and be credit deficient. Maybe your student didn't complete. Maybe your student is missing an English and a math credit. The IEP team, if the student has met the goals and objectives, and if you're wondering what those are, I would go to your case study, get out the IEP, and look at the goals and objectives for the student that you're addressing. You can graduate a student on their goals and their objectives. That's rare. That's the exception. That's not the rule, but that is an option. And obviously, I've been an administrator since 2003. I've seen that option exercised. So I haven't forgotten you, Colleen, and Amanda, I don't know if I muddied the waters for you or not. But
no, it definitely helped, actually, this conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right, now let's talk. Colleen wants to know about perhaps a definition of accommodation versus a modification. Okay, so an accommodation might be a way in which I allow a student to get something done. Extended time. Extended time is a simple accommodation. I haven't changed, i.e. modified anything, but I have accommodated and provided an alternative path that others perhaps don't have. A modification is I am changing. Not to pick on Amanda, but let's take that program of study again. I'm going to modify the process. Maybe a student, in order to be proficient in automotive technology, has to demonstrate appropriately doing what we would call a brake job. Pads, rotors, whatever the case might be. A modification would be that depending on the level of the IEP student and its appropriateness, I'm going to give the student, after instruction and after independent practice, I'm going to give the student a how-to, a step-by-step. And I'm going to watch them go through that step-by-step. A greater accommodation would be, I'm going to take that outline and I'm going to walk with them. Step 1 is, step 2 is, step 3 is. So we've gone with the greatest degree of unaltered product. The student's going to perform that brake service independently by themselves with supervision. And obviously I'm going to check that work before that car rolls out the door. To, okay, we're going to modify this. If I put a sheet in front of this kid, step 1, 2, 3, 4, I know they're good. To a greater modification as to, I'm going to watch them do each step and might have to help them on each step. Going further, does that mean that those 3 examples need to be 3 different learners? Well, maybe. But what if it's one learner learning to do it with oversight, then learning to do it by direction, and then learning to do it independently? So accommodation and modification: accommodate, giving them a path; modifying, doing something differently, modifying. And a lot of times too, when you think of modifications, we go right to the test. Maybe, and again, with the IEP crutch, with a multiple choice written test, they get 2 selections as compared to 4. That's a common modification I've seen. I think sometimes we can do better than that. I think sometimes oral examination can be appropriate with students who struggle writing but can explain the problem to us. But again, those types of things take more time. So I don't know, Colleen, if I've cleared that up for you, accommodation versus modification. And if you would like to ask me a follow-up question, that would be fine as well. Thumbs up. Okay. All right. Again, I did send this out as a Word document. It's nothing more than copy pasting. I'm trying to frame your thoughts, right? We're going to go through this case study rubric. When I look at it, this is what I'm going to look for: the selection, the data collection, the analysis, the strategies. And I don't care if you have it flowing as a paragraph. I don't care if you have a short answer underneath each one of these sections, but that's how I'm going to go about. I'm going to give everybody credit for the draft, okay? Because that's what it's supposed to be, draft. And then when I read your stuff, I'll put any feedback in that box, and then the final copy should be the final copy. But I'm not anticipating a great difference between the draft and the final copy. Any thoughts on previous feedback? I hope you're looking at it. I am reading what you're doing and giving you feedback on your assignments. Any feedback relative to the draft versus the final copy? Like, for example, well, I got 25 on the draft. How did I get 20 on the final copy? Well, I gave you credit for doing the draft. And I gave you feedback and respond to the feedback. So that's all I have to say here. I have 4:58. That was a fast hour. James, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure. Module 2 reflective journal. You haven't graded those yet, or you have, or you gave us points or whatever.
Give me one quick second, please.
Yep. I just want to make sure.
I do believe I was caught up with everything that was due on the 11th. I have not looked at anything that is due on the 18th. So I'm looking here at, I see the case study here, and then let me go to assignments because I've all right. Assignments.
Well, I just want to make sure that I wasn't supposed to do the reflective since I was in, our meeting. I was just
No, you're not supposed to do the journal when you are in the meeting here.
right.
And it was
I was just saying because it was overdue, and I panic when I see that.
okay. So no, I'm not worried about that. Amanda, you had a question?
It was actually just to clarify that as well. I wanted to make sure we didn't, if we were out on the feeds, then we didn't have to be missing the.
This is your reflective journal. We're reflecting collectively.
And then when you give us feedback, is there any way to talk back to you guys, or is that not open? Because I can never figure out how, like, if someone says feedback, that I could answer them back.
No, so I think it's a one-way. From what I can tell of the system, I'm relatively new to Canvas as the instructor, so I'm giving individual feedback. If you want to give me feedback on the feedback or have a dialogue, you can use my Point Park email, and I'd be happy to do so. Okay, it's right about at 5 o'clock. I know how this goes. Is there any questions for the good of the order? Go ahead,
I just want to make it, just since we've gone through more of this than you have, just what had been happening in the past modules in regards to the reflective journal is typically, like, if we attended this week's meeting, they would be grading that reflective journal for us. So then we would know ahead of, like, before the due date. So that way you would kind of know if you needed to do the reflective journal or if they caught you in the Zoom and your attendance was captured.
Okay, so they were giving
I
you
think
credit for the reflective journal prior to the meeting?
No. So essentially, like last week's, the journal that would have been due here on the 18th, we attended the Zoom on the 12th. So sometime during that week is when we would have got that reflective journal grade put in, and then we knew it was not due on the 18th because we would have. Does that make sense, or did I confuse you?
I'm still a little confused, but we'll figure it out. I'm not going to hammer anybody, right? That's not why we're here. So, let me take a look at that. Maybe I'll get it right next week. Well, next week we're not doing anything. It's Monday, Memorial Day, and again, the first Monday in June we will be at 4 o'clock, and then either the. What did we say? Do we say the 9th or the 16th we're going to go to 9 a.m.? I think we only have a few people who are still in on the 9th. Is that accurate? Okay. So I'll discuss that. Joe, go ahead.
I just wanted to say we have a reflective journal due on the 25th and we're not meeting. So are you going to give us credit for that, or do we have to do the reflective journal since a Memorial Day?
I'd say I'll put it in the announcement to go ahead and do the reflective journal because it's on particular content, but I'll give you an extra week to do it. How's that?
Works for me.
Well, wouldn't that be this week's meeting since it's module 3?
Let me check here.
You know what? Actually, I think you're right because the one that's still missing in my canvas was due from yesterday, which would have been last week's meeting.
All right. So, okay. All right. If you're patient with me, I'm playing catch up here.
Len, for what I just looked at the calendar, it would be the reflective 4 journal because we would meet the 26th, and if you don't attend that one, which we would cancel for Memorial Day, then it would be due the 1st, that reflective journal.
All right. Does that make sense for everybody? So I got half of that. Hold on one second. Let me go here, 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 and I'll go here, and go reflective. Yeah, so the Module 3 reflective journal that is due on the 25th, we'll just make 3 and 4 due on June 1. And if you got to go, you got to go. But I'm trying to get everybody caught up here.
But if we attended the meet and learn today, that would satisfy
That
reflective
would set,
for Module
right.
3.
Yes, yes, yes. So today's meets Module 3. So while you were with me, the majority of you obviously do these and not the journals. Do you get notifications when I put grades in?
Yes. I noticed.
You should all have
I noticed that mine was missing the last time I attended.
All right, so check in the last 30 seconds. I tried to update both sections. If there are any individual problems, again, email me and we'll get it fixed. So attending this meeting, you don't have to do 3, and I'll try to have 4 done before June 1. How's that? Does that get us all on the same page?
Sounds good.
All right. We are on overtime. I apologize. But I'm going to thank everybody. Another enjoyable conversation. I appreciate the learning and growing together. I will see you in 2 weeks.